cotton candy, all of the ice. Hello, welcome to Sage and Stone Homestead. If you have not met me yet, my name is Heather. This video is part of a collaboration put on by the Inquisitive Farm Wife. It is called Freeze Dried February. We recently got a freeze dryer in 2023. I believe it was around June, so I haven't had a lot of time to really use it over the winter. We do a lot of our food preservation kind of towards the end of the summer, at the end of the garden harvest and into winter. And it's actually been quite a while since I've cranked this thing up. So I'm really excited to hopefully reduce the volume that our bone broth takes up. So I have sitting right here 2.5 gallons of bone broth. It does not take us very long to go through this much bone broth, but while it's here, it is taking up quite a lot of space. And my goal with using the freeze dryer is to try to reduce these nutrients down into a smaller package because we live in a really small house. Our storage ability is very limited, and these half-gallon jars are very precious to me. And I would love to use these for goat's milk instead of bone broth. We raise much of our own meat here on our homestead, and so the bones used to make this bone broth were from animals that we processed here. This is a very precious thing to us, and I know that our freeze dryer is going to be able to maintain all of that nutritional integrity. And what I'm really interested to learn is how much of the liquid really gets drawn out and how much volume what's left is going to take up. We have a large freeze dryer, and we bought our freeze dryers from Harvest Right before they started to add in more trays per size. So our large freeze dryer has the 5 trays. So I'm going to put 1.5 gallon jars worth of broth in each tray. A little bit of a scene change here. I told you guys that we have a very small house. We do. So my husband built this really awesome Homestead overflow shed. It has been a lifesaver for us. When you are homesteading and growing a lot of your own food, there's a lot of things that really take up space that are involved with that, especially when you have dairy animals. So we have power to our shed. It's insulated. It's awesome. This size freeze dryer needs its own dedicated outlet and its own dedicated circuit inside the breaker box, and so we specially built this exact spot for this freeze dryer, and it's been so awesome. The freeze dryer is almost done with its 15 minutes of pre-cooling. I've opened it 4 seconds early. The freeze dryer is not going to care. So you can, and it is sometimes suggested to pre-freeze your liquids before you stick them in the freeze dryer. It's supposed to save time. I haven't necessarily found that to be the case, but also freezer space is at a premium, especially this time of year. This is meat harvest season for us this time of year. So at this time, our freezers are pretty much all the way full. So I don't have the extra space to try to freeze these liquids, especially level space. So I just put this bone broth in the jar a few hours ago. It is still a little bit warm. It's not going to be a problem. It is just going to take the freeze dryer a little longer to freeze it fully, which is fine. And like I mentioned, I'm going to put 1.5 gallon jar per tray. I've got to pour slowly. And when you put liquids in the freeze dryer, it's really smart. I learned this from somebody else, to pour it when the trays are already loaded. You don't want to pull it out far like this because gravity happens and you're going to have a mess. So just pull out the tray a tiny bit and pour slowly. I'm going to stop right there. I've freeze dried milk a whole bunch of times in this freeze dryer, and I thought I remembered fitting 1/2 gallon per tray, but maybe I didn't. The good thing is I know that liquids only increase in size by about 10% when they expand as they freeze, and so that shouldn't be a problem. Close this valve. My guess is that this is probably going to take about 46 to 48-ish hours to complete the process. We're starting with semi-warm broth. It's going to have to bring that down to a super low temperature. I think I have my freeze dryer set at -10, something like that, and then it's got to go through the freeze dryer process. And in my experience, something with a super high water content like broth well, I've never done broth before, but I've done milk, and I've done some tomatoes that had quite a high water content. Those things tend to take a long time, but it's not gonna take that long for you, thankfully. For you, it'll be done in just the snap of a finger. We'll see if I can figure out that transition. Probably not. Alrighty, so the freeze dryer is done. It took 50 hours to finish, from semi-warm broth all the way to completely freeze-dried. So the freeze dryer is still running right now. I'm sure you can hear it. I noticed that the freeze dryer was finished last night right before I was ready to go to bed. So what I did was actually just increase the dry time. So the freeze dryer has been continuing to freeze dry overnight, and I'm ready to take it out right now. So let's say that the freeze dryer was finished overnight sometime and I didn't have a chance to increase the dry time. That's really not a problem. What the freeze dryer is going to do is bring all of the food back down to a super, super cold temperature. It actually does heat up the food in order to dry it. It's a really interesting process. If I were to then shut off the freeze dryer and remove the food while the food is very, very cold, what I risk is condensation from this warm room settling on the super cold food and heating up the trays before removing them, or just leaving it on the dry cycle will help alleviate that, since the dry cycle is running warm. Actually right now it says 128 degrees Fahrenheit. That's very warm. So what I'm going to do now is just cancel my extra dry time. Open the valve. There, now all the pressure is out of the chamber and the door will open. So this is what one tray of freeze-dried bone broth looks like. It actually looks like it's formed this singular mat there on the tray. This is cool. So we have had a little bit of shrinkage, but there's actually significantly more volume left to this broth than I expected, given how liquidy broth is. This reminds me a lot of when I freeze dry milk. There's more left behind than you would think. All right, so when I store a lot of my dry goods that I know I'm going to use within about a year or 18 months, I like to store them in half-gallon jars like this, or quart jars, whatever size suits the food. We started out with 2 gallons of broth, and I think it's all going to fit in here. I've got this big funnel. This actually came off of, I think it was like a sauce maker machine or something. Works really well for this. Look what it does. It just lifts off, so this should be fairly easy to put away. My little Fermentaholics pickle pounder works really well to squish stuff down in. I am noticing a little bit of liquid, or something that appears to be liquid, left on the pan, and by the feel of it, it feels like fat. So I didn't skim this broth specifically. I actually canned up some of the broth as well as setting some aside for freeze drying, and a lot of the broth that I canned up does have the fat on top. It's really not ideal to can broth with fat in it or to freeze dry broth with fat in it. The reason being is that it doesn't actually freeze dry well, and the fat can tend to go rancid just more quickly than your average freeze-dried or canned food. When oil goes rancid, you can smell it, so it's not as if we were going to be consuming something that's going to harm us. But as I mentioned, we go through bone broth pretty quickly, and so I don't think it's going to be a problem for us. Let's give this a taste, as is. Whoa. So it's absolutely a concentrated flavor, but that's amazing. My mouth is watering. Holy cow. That's good. Like, I could eat this as a snack. It's like meat cotton candy. That's bizarre. And very, very good. I did not salt. I didn't salt this batch before freeze drying it, but it actually tastes like it has some salt in it, which is weird. I know that this batch of bone broth did have some ham bones in it, and that ham had been cured, so that might be where the salt flavor is coming from. So the freeze dryer is empty now. Look at all of the ice around the outside edge. Isn't that amazing? So that's all the liquid that came out of the broth. That's about as full as it can get. So of course we need to try to reconstitute this. I know that it's going to work out really well, but it occurred to me that I could actually kind of ultra concentrate our broth and make it taste more rich. So I can control the level of flavor that we get out of it and the level of nutrition out of each cup. So that's cool. So I'll do a little bit of calculating off camera because I'm not great at math and I need some time to figure it out. But we did get a half gallon packed of broth out of the 2 gallons of liquid broth that we had started with. But offhand, I think it's probably a 4-to-1 ratio, you know, 4 cups liquid to maybe 1 cup of broth. So that would reconstitute a quart. I've got my cute little Vigo garden mug that looks just like my garden bed that's in my greenhouse. And I'm gonna put, let's do 3 heaping because we like some flavor. That was good as candy. Looks like it may be a little thin. Ooh, hot. Hot, delicious, but it does need a little bit more. And that's the beauty of having it powdered like this. I can adjust the amount of powder to reconstitute it to my preference. So good. So now that it's been, you know, reconstituted, I almost said rehydrated. I mean, I guess that's the case, but now that it's been reconstituted, I can tell that it does need some salt. It's actually amazing how salty this tasted and how not salty this tastes, but I'm not mad about it. I can use this for many more applications if I don't salt it ahead of time. Actually just bought a new batch of desiccant packs. When you put freeze-dried food inside like a Mylar bag, like this, you should put an oxygen absorber in there. It's just gonna help increase the shelf life. The desiccant pack that I'm gonna put in here, it's not an oxygen absorber. If I can get this open. There we go, got it. So what these little guys do is they actually just will act to absorb any possibility of remaining moisture in the food. There likely isn't any because maybe the freeze dryer didn't do a good enough job. If there is any moisture in the jar, it's literally just because the freeze-dried food is so dry that even just bringing it into maybe a more humid space, it can start to absorb moisture from the air. So this will help alleviate any moisture issues. So we took our volume of bone broth from 4 of these half-gallon jars down to 1. That saves space, that saves jars, and as I mentioned before, this allows me to tailor the concentration of my broth, and I think that's really cool. Don't forget, this video was part of a collaboration, a really awesome collaboration of lots of different creators showcasing how they use their freeze dryers. I'm gonna leave the collaboration playlist up here. Make sure you go to all the videos in the playlist, make some comments on those videos, subscribe to those channels. Those comments and subscriptions are going to enter you to win quite a few awesome prizes. So don't miss out. I'll see you guys again soon.